A year that saw Kane emerge from hell to confront his brother. When Survivor Series ended with the most controversial finish in wrestling history. When Stone Cold Steve Austin began his meteoric rise to the top of the industry. When the first Hell in a Cell match redefined brutality. When Vince McMahon transformed from announcer to the greatest villain the business had ever seen. When DX made parents hide the remote from their kids. When Rocky shed his babyface persona and became The Rock. And these are just some of the things that happened in the crazy year of 1997. From a creative standpoint, 1997 was the most important year in WWE history. It's the year that changed the world of pro wrestling forever. But what exactly made this year so transformative? What were the rivalries, double turns, and backstage controversies that would redefine the company forever? Let's turn back the clock and revisit the craziest year in WWE history. Heading into 1997, the WWF found itself in a desperate fight for survival. WCW had been demolishing them in the ratings war ever since the introduction of the New World Order in the summer of 1996. Shawn Michaels, despite being the top guy and delivering consistently incredible matches, felt the weight of the company's struggles on his shoulders. Just weeks after regaining the WWF Championship at the Royal Rumble, Michaels would deliver his infamous promo where he lost his smile and vacate the championship. The official reason was a knee injury that required time off, but the backstage rumor, one that Bret Hart loudly voiced, was that Shawn was ducking their inevitable rematch at WrestleMania 13. With the Heartbreak Kid out of action, most fans thought this would finally be Bret Hart's time to carry the company as its undisputed top babyface. But 1997 had different plans. Instead of Bret Hart's coronation, the year would witness the meteoric rise of a beer-drinking, foul-mouthed, authority-defying rebel who would transform not just the WWF, but professional wrestling itself. After winning the 1996 King of the Ring tournament, Austin cut his infamous Austin 3:16 promo that changed the trajectory of his career. But Stone Cold's journey to becoming the face of pro wrestling truly began in 1997. At the 1997 Royal Rumble, Austin entered at number 5 and lasted until the very end, where Bret Hart eliminated him over the top rope. But the referees were distracted and didn't see the elimination. In true Stone Cold fashion, Austin slid back into the ring and dumped out Vader, The Undertaker, and Bret Hart himself to steal the victory. Bret Hart was furious, and rightfully so. He went on Raw the following night and cut a promo announcing he was quitting the WWF, tired of being screwed over by Austin, Shawn Michaels, and Vince McMahon himself. But WWF President Gorilla Monsoon convinced Hart to return by booking a fatal four-way match at In Your House, giving Austin, Vader, The Undertaker, and Bret another chance to earn the WrestleMania main event. When Shawn vacated the title after the Rumble, this match became for the championship itself. Bret would win that night, capturing his 4th WWF championship, but just like everything else in 1997, it wouldn't last. The very next night on Raw, Psycho Sid regained the title thanks to interference from Stone Cold, giving Bret yet another reason to complain about his treatment, and complain he did. Throughout early 1997, Bret Hart transformed from the respected veteran into a bitter, whining heel. His complaints were completely justified from a logical standpoint, but wrestling fans don't always respond to logic. They respond to attitude, charisma, and rebellion. Stone Cold had all three in spades, and every time Bret pointed out his rule-breaking antics, it only made Austin cooler by comparison. The stage was set for WrestleMania 13 in Chicago, where Bret Hart and Steve Austin would face each other in a submission match that would go down in history. At WrestleMania 13, Austin and Bret beat the hell out of each other in a brutal war that lasted over 22 minutes. The key moment came towards the end when Bret locked in the sharpshooter while Austin's face was a crimson mask. Austin eventually passed out from the blood loss, giving Bret the victory. But while Bret won the match, Austin won the war. Chicago went home that night having witnessed wrestling history, a double turn so perfectly executed that both men's careers would never be the same. However, the feud between Austin and Hart didn't end at WrestleMania. It intensified. Bret reformed the Hart Foundation, who were heroes in Canada and villains in America. Austin became their chief antagonist, the beer-drinking American hero who would defend his country's honor. Their rivalry culminated in a brutal street fight which further established Austin as the toughest SOB in the WWF. But Austin's rise hit a devastating speed bump at SummerSlam when Owen Hart, attempting a sit-down tombstone piledriver, accidentally broke Austin's neck. Doctors told him his career might be over, but Stone Cold refused to listen. He'd missed some time, but nothing, not a broken neck, not doctor's orders, not common sense, would stop the rise of the Texas Rattlesnake in the WWF. By the end of 1997, despite the injury, Austin would return and position himself as the company's next megastar. The Austin era was coming, and nobody could stop it. But while Austin was bulldozing his way to the top of the WWF, the company was simultaneously crafting a supernatural saga that would become one of the most popular storylines in history. The Undertaker had been the WWF's resident phenom since 1990, but in 1997, the dead man's past came back to haunt him in the form of a brother he thought had died in a fire decades earlier. The story began with The Undertaker's longtime manager Paul Bearer, who had guided the phenom for years. Following his title win at WrestleMania 13, Bearer attempted to rejoin Taker as his manager. When Taker refused, Bearer claimed to possess a dark secret from Undertaker's past. When The Undertaker refused to bend to Bearer's will, the vengeful manager began aligning himself with Undertaker's most dangerous rival, Mankind. In April, Taker and Mankind faced off with Bearer at ringside. Undertaker overcame the numbers game, but Bearer's threats continued to hang over him like a dark cloud. By the summer, Bret Hart had emerged as the top heel in the company, which led to an unlikely feud with The Undertaker. These two veterans with completely different styles were booked to collide at SummerSlam for the WWF Championship. But this match had another crucial ingredient that made it unpredictable: the involvement of Shawn Michaels as the special guest referee. Shawn had been lurking around WWF television since losing his smile, making occasional appearances but not wrestling. His selection as referee for the SummerSlam main event immediately raised eyebrows, given his hatred for Bret Hart. Throughout the match, Michaels appeared to be calling it down the middle, but in the closing moments, Shawn accidentally struck The Undertaker with a steel chair that had been intended for Bret Hart. The miscue cost the dead man his championship, with Hart escaping SummerSlam as the new WWF champion. The Undertaker was furious. He'd been screwed out of his title by the Heartbreak Kid, whether intentionally or not, and he wanted revenge. This set up a feud between two of the WWF's biggest stars, both of whom had been babyfaces for the majority of their careers. But this time, Shawn Michaels wasn't coming back as a hero. When HBK returned to active competition, it was as the leader of D-Generation X, the most rebellious and controversial faction the WWF had ever produced. D-Generation X, consisting of Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Chyna, and Rick Rude, represented everything the Attitude Era would become: crude, disrespectful, and completely unapologetic about breaking every rule in the book. Their treatment of The Undertaker was particularly ruthless. DX would regularly jump the dead man, beating him down with the numbers advantage while mocking his supernatural persona. The animosity between Undertaker and Shawn Michaels reached its boiling point at Bad Blood in October, where the two would face off in the first-ever Hell in a Cell match. For 30 minutes, Undertaker dominated Shawn Michaels and used the demonic structure to systematically dismantle the leader of D-Generation X. But just when it appeared The Undertaker would finally get his definitive victory over Shawn Michaels, the lights went out. A nightmare from Taker's past was coming back to haunt him. After months of threats, Bearer had revealed Undertaker's darkest secret. He had a brother, and that brother was alive. His name was Kane, and he was coming for revenge. As darkness engulfed the arena, an ominous music started playing. The lights went red. And then, in one of the most spectacular debuts in wrestling history, Kane ripped the door off the Hell in a Cell. Kane entered the cell, stared at his brother for a long moment, and then delivered a devastating tombstone piledriver to The Undertaker. Shawn Michaels, barely conscious, draped an arm over the dead man for the 3 count, but nobody cared about the match result anymore. Kane had arrived, and the WWF would never be the same. The Brothers of Destruction storyline had begun, and it would become one of the most important sagas in wrestling history. But while Kane and Undertaker's personal saga unfolded on the screen, behind the scenes, a perfect storm of politics, personal grudges, and ego clashes was brewing that would lead to the most controversial finish in WWE history. The Montreal Screw Job changed the course of the Monday Night Wars forever, and the roots of the Screw Job trace back to the complicated relationship between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Their backstage confrontations had become increasingly hostile throughout 1997, with both men refusing to back down or show respect to the other. But personal animosity wasn't the only issue. The WWF's financial struggles in 1997 had pushed the company dangerously close to bankruptcy. Vince McMahon, desperate to cut costs, approached Bret Hart about his lucrative contract and admitted he could no longer afford to honor it. McMahon encouraged Bret to negotiate with WCW, where Eric Bischoff was more than happy to offer the Hitman a massive deal. There was just one problem, though. Bret Hart was still the WWF champion, and he absolutely refused to lose the title to Shawn Michaels, especially in Canada. Bret proposed several alternatives. He'd lose the title the next night on Raw. He'd lose it at the next pay-per-view. He'd lose it to anyone except Shawn Michaels. Hell, he'd even forfeit the championship or get disqualified at Survivor Series. Vince McMahon listened to these proposals and, at least outwardly, seemed to agree. Bret was told they'd do a disqualification finish at Survivor Series that would protect both men while setting up a title change down the road. Bret believed he and Vince had an understanding, but Vince McMahon was lying. Behind the scenes, McMahon had already made the decision to take the title off Bret at Survivor Series. The fear, whether justified or paranoid, was that Bret might show up on Nitro with the WWF Championship, humiliating Vince's company on live television the same way Alundra Blaze had done with the Women's Championship. McMahon couldn't risk it, so he devised a plan to legitimately screw Bret Hart out of the championship. At Survivor Series 1997, the main event pitted WWF champion Bret Hart against Shawn Michaels, with the agreed-upon disqualification finish supposedly locked in. For the first 9 minutes, the match unfolded like any other high-profile main event. But then, Shawn Michaels locked Bret Hart in his own finishing move, the sharpshooter, in the center of the ring. Bret wasn't supposed to tap out. The plan, as far as he knew, was for the match to break down into chaos. But as Shawn locked in the sharpshooter, Vince McMahon shouted at the ref to ring the damn bell. The referee immediately called for the bell, and the ring announcer announced that Shawn Michaels was the new WWF champion. Bret Hart, still in the sharpshooter, hadn't tapped out. He hadn't submitted. He'd been screwed, legitimately and publicly, by the company he'd devoted his entire adult life to. The confusion in Bret's eyes turned to realization, then to fury. Shawn Michaels quickly exited the ring and escaped backstage with DX as chaos erupted. Bret Hart spit in Vince's face while fans in Montreal rained garbage into the ring. In the backstage area immediately following the match, Bret would confront Vince McMahon face-to-face and, according to multiple witnesses, punch the boss square in the jaw, giving him a black eye that would be visible on television for weeks. Bret Hart left the WWF that night and didn't return for almost a decade. The next night on Raw, Vince McMahon sat down for an interview with Jim Ross. Sporting the black eye Bret had given him, Vince delivered his now infamous line, "Bret screwed Bret." The intention was to position himself as a sympathetic authority figure. Instead, Vince McMahon became the most hated man in professional wrestling. Fans didn't buy his justifications. They saw a backstabbing corporate villain who'd screwed over a beloved star, but instead of trying to win fans back, the WWF leaned into it. The Mr. McMahon character was born, an evil billionaire boss who'd do anything to maintain power and control. This character would become the perfect antagonist for Stone Cold Steve Austin's anti-authority rebellion, providing the final ingredient needed for the Attitude Era to reach its full potential. But while the main event scene of 1997 was dominated by Austin, Undertaker, and the Montreal Screw Job, the year was also filled with countless other moments and character transformations that helped shape the WWF's evolution toward the Attitude Era. Perhaps no transformation in 1997 was more important to the WWF's long-term success than the evolution of The Rock. The third-generation superstar had debuted in late 1996 as the ultimate babyface, but was actively rejected by the fans. The turning point came when Rocky embraced the hate and joined the Nation of Domination as a cocky, arrogant heel. As a member of the Nation, Rocky began finding his voice on the microphone and developed the catchphrases and electrifying presence that would eventually make him the most successful crossover star in wrestling history. By the end of 1997, Rocky had shortened his name to simply The Rock and became the leader of the Nation of Domination. But not all of 1997's memorable moments were positive. On October 5th, the day of the Bad Blood pay-per-view, tragedy struck when Brian Pillman was found dead in his hotel room due to an undetected heart condition exacerbated by years of painkiller abuse. What made the situation even more uncomfortable was the way WWF handled it. The very next night on Raw, Vince McMahon conducted a live interview with Pillman's widow, less than 24 hours after her husband's death. The interview came across as exploitative and tasteless, and would be rejected by fans as well as critics. International controversy also plagued the WWF in 1997 when Vader was detained in Kuwait during a tour. The incident occurred after Vader got physical with a Kuwaiti television presenter during an interview when the interviewer asked if wrestling was fake. But the most significant announcement of the year came on December 15th during an episode of Raw, when Vince McMahon acknowledged that the WWF had been losing the Monday Night Wars and that drastic changes were necessary. He told audiences that the company was embarking on a new creative direction. He promised that the WWF would no longer insult the intelligence of its fans with cartoonish characters. The product would become edgier, more realistic, and reflective of the rebellious attitude that defined late 1990s pop culture. The Attitude Era was born, and pro wrestling would never be the same. By the time 1997 ended, every piece was in place for the WWF's resurgence. It was the year the WWF stopped trying to recapture past glory and instead embraced the chaos, controversy, and attitude that would define the next chapter of professional wrestling. And if you want to relive all the greatness of the Attitude Era, check out this video next.